We are so happy to have Doug Brunt here tonight at Politics in Prose. And I just want to say I have been personally looking forward to this event for months, actually. And here's why. Several reasons why. Partly because I always love books that are a great summer read. And his new book, Trophy Son, is a great summer read. Partly because, and this is sort of an inside bookseller thing, so forgive me, but as a bookseller, when you find a novel that you know with 100% certainty you can rabidly recommend as a Father's Day gift, you are very, very happy. So Trophy Son is also that. It is also because I'm a huge tennis fanatic myself, and of course he writes about tennis in this book. It's kind of a rollicking and very fun and candid look at the world of professional tennis. But I think most of all, the reason that I really love this book and that I was excited about this event is that in our world today, I think a universal experience for most parents and most children now, sadly, is that whether our kids play sports or whether they're chess masters or they're in theater or they're in robotics or they're great musicians, we see this unfolding of dramas that are built around differing expectations over what children should do and how they should perform in a very hyper-competitive world. And Doug's book is really about, at its heart, how these expectations and opportunities and hopes and burdens of competition and achievement play out in families, and sometimes, frankly, cause us to lose sight of our own North Stars, our own common sense, our sound values, and the unconditional love that we should all feel for those who we cherish most. So I first read Trophy Son, I think I mentioned I had been looking forward to this event for months. I first read it in galley form last winter. And I read it in one sitting. I just loved it. And I couldn't put it down. I'm sure if you start reading it, you will have the same experience. It's just good on so many different levels, and I do hope you will enjoy it as much as I have. Now, I would also be remiss in introducing Doug without mentioning that even though he came relatively late to his writing career, you may not know this, but being a novelist is his second career. He already has published 2 novels, one of which was a New York Times bestseller called Ghosts of Manhattan. Trophy Son is clearly a very worthy successor. It's only been out this week.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. 2 weeks. And it's already getting really excellent reviews in a variety of newspapers and magazines. So I was going to say congratulations and keep writing, but he's already told me he's already working on the next book. So we have that already to look forward to. So that's really good news for all of us who are your fans. And of course, as delighted as we are to have Doug here tonight, we're also delighted to host his interviewer this evening. She happens to be one of the best in the business. She also happens to be his wife. Megyn Kelly, as you all know, has been one of the most highly watched news anchors on television for many years. She's just moved from Fox to NBC. She now hosts Sunday Night with Megyn Kelly. You may know, if you read her book, that she is started her career as an attorney. She was a high-powered attorney. Of course, now she's a prominent television journalist. But here at P&P, for all those things we love you for, we love you most because you, too, are a best-selling author. Late last year, she did publish the book I just mentioned. It's a really excellent memoir. Memoirs are really hard, by the way, to do well, so I don't say that lightly. Hers is really, really good. It's candid, it's funny, it's touching, a story of her triumphs and her challenges. It's called Settle for More. And we had a terrific event with Megyn. I don't know if any of you were there down at 6 and I late last year, and we're so happy to have her back. But she's back tonight, this time not to answer questions, but to ask the questions. So thank you for coming back to do that. I was told that the last time they did something like this was a few years ago on television, I think for one of your earlier books. They've never done it before in a bookstore, so we are so honored to be the venue for Megyn Kelly interviewing Douglas Brunt about his book, and we're just so thrilled to have you both, and congratulations again. And by the way, as you know, we have cards for questions. If you have questions and you'd like to submit them, I think there are cards up here. Maybe you've already filled them out. And Doug and Megyn are both going to sign their books afterwards, which is very generous of you both to do. So stick around, and Father's Day, summer reading, lots of reasons to pick up both books. So thank you both for being here. Such a pleasure.
That was a great intro. Thanks very much.
Thank you. All right. So before we left home today, Doug said, "This is going to be fun." And I said, "That's what you think. You just wait." But this is a privilege because the last time I interviewed Doug about his book, as Lissa points out, was on the Kelly file. And I think we gave him 3 minutes. And when you were doing live 3 minutes and trying to get up and down on a book, I mean, it was like rapid fire, bang, 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 which as a news anchor, I was used to. But poor Doug was like, who's this crazy lady? Anyway, so this is a much more civilized setting. Thank you for being part of it. All right, so let's start with Trophy Son and what the meaning of that title is to you, Duggar.
That actually is a funny story because I have come up with titles for the books that I've written at different times with each book. And this was the first book where I had the title even in the research phase. I'll do months of research before I start writing. And so while I was putting together all my thoughts and an outline for the novel, I had this title that I loved for the book, and it was Specialized. And so I wrote the whole book because the character in the novel has a very specialized youth. It's single sport specialization. So that was the thinking for the book. And I had that title all the way through selling the book to St. Martin's, and this editor, George Whitty, who I love, you may know. He's a terrific guy. He's been in the business for many years. And so after I sold the book, I'm sitting down with George for our first editorial sit down, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, man, I've really nailed it with the title, Wire to Wire. That's never happened before. And he sits down with me and he says, I love the book about the title. And I thought, oh my God, I thought I had this one. And his thinking was that the title Specialized sounded too non-fiction-y and wasn't going to convey a lot of the things that are in the book, and primarily the father-son relationship. And so we went round and round and round, and many people in marketing and PR and editorial at St. Martin's Press, my publisher, came up with lists, and I was coming up with new lists. We had 100 titles spinning around by email, and I did not come up with Trophy Son. Someone else did, but I picked it out of a list. I said, that's the one when I saw it, and told George, this is the one I like, and he agreed, so we went with that. And I in the end, that was a great piece of value that George added, because I think it is a better title for the book.
I think it easily conveys what you're going for here, right? Which is that the son, Anton, he's not just a son. It's not a normal relationship that most of us have with our children. He has a special kind of value in his father's eyes, which proves to be very problematic.
Right, and as Liz was saying earlier, it's not, well, in this case it's tennis, but we see this in our society in this generation far more even than in the last generation when I was growing up, and you were growing up in the 70s and 80s,
wow.
where parents, and I do think it comes from a good place almost all the time. Sometimes it gets a little wrong-headed, but it comes from a good place where parents are invested so much in their kids' development, and they want the best for their kids. But it's led to this very intense participation in early youth in various disciplines, whether it's chess or violin or soccer or lacrosse or tennis. And so part of why the reason I chose this subject is our kids are getting to that age. Our oldest is 7. And this travel sports culture that has sprung up on us begins when kids are 8 or 9 years old, and you have to then decide if you're going to get involved. And if it's a travel soccer team, it's travel out to weekend games all day Saturday and Sunday and weekday practices, and the whole family has to commit and make sacrifices around this. And you tell your friends, look, I'll see you on the weekends in about 10 years when travel sports is over.
And we're tired.
Yeah, right. We'd like our weekend. We like our kids. We don't want to do it. We'd like to spend more time with the kids.
And we don't want to feel guilty about not doing it, so we're trying to get all of society not to do it through this book.
And it's even more than the guilt. It's the kids, they need to pick a sport, and the coaches schedule over each other. They encourage you to play just one sport. So as an 8 or 9-year-old, you need to decide, is it going to be soccer, lacrosse, basketball? And it's too early to make those kinds of decisions.
And we've talked about this, how we see it in our friends and we see it with ourselves, that so often it's not a conscious choice to surrender your family's lifestyle or your child's lifestyle to this. It's just the way society is set up in 2017. Like we want our children to play sports in high school, for example, because you learn all sorts of great things and the experience of playing and being with a coach. But at this point, if we want our kids to play high school athletics, not go off to the pros, not get a college scholarship, we have to start drilling them.
Right. If you opt out of travel sports when you're 8 or 9, you have this feeling, particularly in certain towns where sports are a little bit more intense, you have this feeling that you're no longer mainstreaming your kid and that they'll be deprived of a high school athletic experience, which is something we really would like for our kids to have. None of our kids is going to go pro in anything, but I think athletics is a really valuable vehicle to teach kids important values like discipline and teamwork and practice equals improvement. But when things they sort of cross that line into being too intense, rather than athletics being a vehicle for growth, it actually becomes an inhibitor for personal growth.
I think Yarly may go pro at potty humor. I don't know. I think she's got a good chance.
She could write Captain Underpants Volume 2.
Why tennis? Now, I know that you play tennis, and Doug won't tell you this, but he plays tennis very well. He's a very good tennis player. But there was a reason you chose that venue for the background of your novel.
There are a couple of reasons. One is it's not explored that much in fiction. There are a lot of baseball books and football books and things like that. Tennis isn't. David Foster Wallace has written a bit about tennis, but there's not that much in fiction around tennis, and I think it's an interesting sport to shed some light on and I know it a bit. But the other reason is that of all these sports we've mentioned, soccer, lacrosse, chess, violin, any kind of discipline, tennis is really at the extreme end of it in terms of commitment and sacrifice and isolation. With soccer and all the travel leagues for that, or basketball, you're still meant to finish high school and hopefully go to college and maybe beyond. But with tennis, if you're very good, you don't even go to the junior prom. You're out of high school, you're down at one of these tennis academies. Bollettieri is the well-known one that was early on, sort of the pointy end of it, but there are many of them now. And thousands of kids pull out of a normal mainstream education and go to a tennis academy where they sort of take some classes, but they're on the court 8 hours a day, drilling from an early age, like 14. And Agassi famously did this, as did Courier. And there are many big names that we know, but there are thousands and thousands of names that you've never heard of. People who made the same sacrifices from the ages of 10 to 18, but never cracked the top 1,000 in the world. And it's a very narrow way and a very specialized way to grow up. So for many of these people, it all ends when you're 18 or 19 or 20. And then you've got 60 years left on the planet, but you spent the last 10 years, these very formative years, basically learning a kid's game.
Your first novel, Ghosts of Manhattan, was set against a Wall Street background. The second was called The Means, which was also a bestseller, and that was set in the world of politics and media, relevant to probably most of the people in this town and in this room. And this one's set against an athletic background. But the first novel, Ghosts of Manhattan, was about a Wall Street trader's effort to save his soul. And Vogue sees a similar theme in Trophy Son, as do I. This is what Vogue wrote, that you convincingly render a pro sports fishbowl peopled by drug-enhanced, endorsement-emblazoned warriors and the attempts of one weary soldier to escape with his soul. Minette, do you agree with that that's the heart of the novel, Anton's struggle to save himself?
Yeah, I do. And he's trying to become a whole person after this inhibiting youth that he's had, and he's trying to figure out whether he can have a second act in his life, because he is going to finish his tennis career at a young age, and he hasn't socialized in a normal way. He hasn't developed adult relationships in a normal way, and he's trying. His whole life has been about fighting to grow in that way and finding ways to do it through the very limited outlets available to him.
Like reading.
And with that's something that's, people always ask me, are you in, Anton is the name of the main character, and people are always asking, are you in Anton? And I would say that would be the main way that I am. And this character, and in part this is inspired by interviews with James Blake, who's a terrific guy and really helped me build some color for the book, I guess. But he is a big reader in this novel, as was I. And for me, it was different. I was shy growing up, and so I loved to read. That was my escape. That was my way to engage the world in a way that shy people do. And with Anton, it was a way to engage the world that he had no access to because he wasn't allowed to have the normal childhood that other kids at school do. He was, kept on the court in the way that these domineering parents of tennis players do. And so a quick James Blake story around this. He had a very different upbringing than a Jim Courier, for example, or a Steffi Graf, who had domineering parents, drilled them, and made them laser focused from a young age on tennis. James was a pretty good player as a kid. He was athletic, he could play pretty well, but he was never really on the pro track at that young age. And he then went to Harvard. And his parents really valued education, and one of the first things they would always ask him whenever they saw him was, "What's the last book you read, James?" And he would always have an answer because he would always, he loved reading. And so his freshman year at Harvard, he grew a few inches, he put on some weight, he had a breakout year, and then he went pro. And he would be on the tour, and his parents would visit him, and they would ask him the same question, "What's the last book you read, James?" And he would answer it. And he was sitting in the players' lounge when this happened one time with some friends, and I can't remember who it was, contemporaries of him. It could have been like a Marty Fish type of player of that era. And so then they turned and said, "What are you reading?" And he said, "I haven't read a book in like 9 years." And they're like, "What? That's terrible." And he said, "I'm not the exception. Your freak son James over here is. He's the only one on the tour who's reading any novels." And so, ironically, this character is nothing like James, who really had, great involved parents who did not force tennis down his throat in the way that it happens for many people on the tour. But I like that aspect of this sort of oddball who's actually reading novels on the pro tennis tour.
Just to pick up on something you said, because I think it's a great story, because we've been beating up a little bit on athletics, but the book it doesn't bash athletics. It's just bashes kind of those overzealous parents who are like, win, win, win at any cost. But you mentioned that you were shy as a child, and people might not know because Doug is now appearing in front of all of you, and he's been on television a bunch of times, and he does a lot of public speaking, but he was painfully shy as a little boy, and it was a friend and a soccer field, right, that helped you make a breakthrough moment from that painful shyness. You want to tell us about that?
Okay. So I don't know exactly the year, but I had this one best friend all the way from nursery school through 6th grade when this school was, it was a nursery school or K through 6. And so from the very outset, he was my best friend, and we were always close, but I never participated in stuff outside of, when we went to recess or did. Mr. Steyerwalt, how you doing?
Hey, Chris Steyerwalt. TV's Chris Steyerwalt, everyone.
So I never would participate in capture the flag stuff. There were these little blue benches, and I would just go sit on the blue bench, and people would do things. And I was happy. It didn't make me sad. I just didn't want to do it. I don't think anyone was feeling sorry for me. I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. That's just what I was comfortable doing. And one day, maybe in like 2nd or 3rd grade, this Will, my best friend, comes over. He's like, "Come on and do it." I'm like, "I don't want to." He's like, "No, come play." And he sort of somehow wrestled me into playing soccer on the field. And I don't know. I'm sure I didn't score a goal, but I didn't embarrass myself. And I was playing around and had a good time. And then from that point on, at recess, I played soccer. It was like, I remember that, even though it was at such a young age, I remember that moment as being like a moment when, there was some progress.
It was the turning point where he started to come out of his shell. That he's too modest to tell you, but he discovered that he was actually pretty good at this, and he could hold his own out on the soccer field. And it gave him a little bit of a confidence, and then he played again, and he had a little bit more confidence, and he had his little buddy, Will, who I just love. And I think it's a nice sort of testament to what athletics can do and why we do push our kids to get out there even when they may not want to. And the book explores where you draw the line, like where do you check those instincts and recognize that.
Well, that's exactly the thing, because athletics can be so valuable. Whether it's athletics or anything, we all hope our kids find a passion for something, and you can see their eyes light up, and they're willing to commit. And I'm all for it if Yates wants to play 8 hours of something on a Saturday and Sunday because he's so into it. And sometimes we just need to get out of the way to let them find what that passion's going to be.
Now, the book centers around the relationship that he has with his father, in particular, to a lesser extent his brother. and a woman who comes into his life. But the relationship with the father is complicated. It's complicated. Anything autobiographical there?
No. I mean, relation with my dad is complicated, but not in this way. When I was thinking about the dad, I was just talking where our son is in school, and there are a number of people from India in the class, and we were joking. There's a comedian from India who has this whole bit on why immigrant dads are so angry. He's like, my dad, he takes a 12-hour nap and he wakes up angry, and I thought that was funny. And so anyway, I had in my mind that the dad would be an immigrant, and that was a part of it. And I chose Greek because just the sort of athletic pedigree of Greeks, the sort of ancient warrior athletes. But really, a lot of who that father is comes from research, external to me. So many players in tennis, I think in athletics in general, I think there are a couple athletes coming up in the NBA draft who've had very controlling parents, kind of like the Todd Marinovich of college football, who was never allowed to have a fast food hamburger, if you remember him. But on the tennis tour in particular, both men and women have had very domineering, controlling parents, from Mary Pierce, Steffi Graf, Andre Agassi, famously, who wrote a nice memoir. It's some of them borderline stalkers. So it really comes from how when you read Agassi's book, you think, oh my gosh, how terrible, and then you look into it, it's like, what's remarkable about it is how unremarkable that is on the tennis tour. It's very common.
One of the reasons the book has gotten attention in the media is it explores the possibility of steroids in professional tennis, which, in response to which the professional tennis world said, what is he saying? Right? So there's been quite a bit of press on that, and there have been some legal threats on that. And I wanted to ask you, what is it like to find yourself embroiled in such a controversy, covered by all of the press, and to feel that angst around you?
Yeah, it's just unknown in our household. No, that never happens. Of our household newspaper, I made the front page for one day when this happened. Then it's like making the front page in our house is a tough thing. But the New York Times did a piece on the book, and it was an interesting switch I saw in the narrative around the media of the book, because prior to that New York Times piece, listen, you would have read it before the Times piece came out, no one really remarked on performance-enhancing drugs in the novel. It was not a major thread. It was an important thread because you can't talk about, we know performance-enhancing drugs are in the sport. There have been positive tests and suspensions in tennis. So we know it's there, and it's part of the sacrifice. And so when you're writing a book about the sacrifices of playing athletics at an elite level, you should include that. And so it's in there, but was never a big, remarkable piece of the book. And then this writer for the New York Times read it, and he thought that was a very interesting angle. And so he decided to write a feature, which is great for a writer to get these off-the-book page coverage. It's one thing to be in the book review section, but if you get it somewhere else, that's more widely read generally, and that's very good for the book. So I was excited. And he started doing research, and he did months of research, including calling around to different players on tour, calling the ITF and the ATP. And when the New York Times gets involved, that ratchets things up a bit. And so we got letters from the ITF and the ATP, or I should say legal counsel at Macmillan did, claiming this could be defamatory and sort of rattling sabers about legal action. And so I sat down with the general counsel of Macmillan. We had these long half-day
Don't tell us
sessions.
what they said. That's privileged.
Truly?
Yes.
Okay. Enough said. But we were comfortable moving ahead with the book, and which we did.
Yes, he's fine. No, I mean, it became an important theme, and my instincts as a lawyer was, methinks thou doth protest too much. It's a novel. It's a fictional character discussing the possibility of steroids in tennis, and you should have seen how these guys reacted. I mean, what does it tell you? You can draw your own conclusions. You're smart enough to figure that one out. I want to talk to you a little bit about process, right? So, is it true that you love to write all your novels while in your underwear?
Only on your day off when you're home. The process generally is we have 3 kids, and they go to 3 different schools, and so it's all hands on deck in the morning. And so some days I'll take 2, and she'll take 1, or vice versa on the other days. And by 9 o'clock, kids are in school, and so I usually find some place to sit down and write. And I like to write in a cafe. There have been places where you can have absolute silence, and I don't like that as much. I like to have a little bit of white noise around me, a little human energy. Not so close that I can hear exactly what they're saying, but just white noise is perfect. So there are a few cafes in the city where I like to go. And I'll write from 9 to noon, and then in the afternoons I'll do research and edits and other work. And that's worked for me. It's sort of a forced routine, but then it's almost like working out where you just sort of come to expect it and your body sort of craves it, and so that time becomes your... Somerset Maugham has a great line about this. Someone asked him, do you always write at a regular time, or do you write only when the spirit moves you? And he said, I write only when the spirit moves me. But fortunately, the spirit moves me from precisely 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Monday through Friday. And it's sort of like that.
So our kids know that Doug writes in the library, and we run through the drill with them. As Doug said, they're 7, 6, and 3. You know, if you ever lose mommy or daddy, what should you do? And they know, go to a police officer. You know, go to somebody who looks like they're in a position of authority. And then we say, then who do you go to? And they say, go to somebody who looks like a mommy or a daddy, right? So, and then what do you say? And I say, well, my name is Yardley Brunt, and I'm looking for my mommy. This is a couple months ago. My mommy, who is Megyn Kelly of Fox News, and my daddy, who is Duggar Brunt of the library. So, do you want to tell them about who gets the first read and the first shot at editing, or?
Megyn does. So I finish a draft, and I get it to where I'm reasonably comfortable. The first draft of anything I write is pretty crappy. I rewrite and rewrite and rewrite 30 times. But she gets the first draft, and she tells it like it is. And so there'll be scribbles and lines and crosses out of no and boring and things like that all over the thing.
And then I write little notes like sorry with a heart.
But then when she likes it and says this is beautiful, then you know that means something. You know it's the rewriting has been working.
What is your favorite part of writing?
It used to be the first draft. You know, when you're in that phase, I was saying earlier, that phase of putting a few pages on the pile every day and you're writing Monday through Friday and just working through it. I used to like that the best. I guess I still do, but I used to hate the rewriting part. You know, I felt like I had this overly romanticized version of what was going to happen. Like the hand of God has come through me and written this novel, and you should take this, and it's all good. And now I like the rewriting because I have come to see how much it can improve the book. And it's almost like I kind of view it as a line graph. You know, so here's the sort of median thing, and here are the best parts of the novel, and here are the worst parts of the novel. And if you can just take those low U's and flip that up, and if you can turn the worst parts of the novel, go find the parts that the weakest and make it the strongest, then you can turn a novel that's like a B- into an A+. You know, so you just keep attacking those bad parts and make them your favorite parts.
It's such a change because I remember when you first submitted your first book, Ghosts of Manhattan, and you got feedback from the editor. What you said to me was, it's as if you've painted this beautiful painting, and it's exactly the way you want. It's a picture of a park. And you hand it in to this stranger, and he says, now I want you to paint a bench and a family. And you're saying, but it's not a painting of that, but you have to do it.
I remember we were in the park, I think, having that conversation, and yeah, that was the overly romanticized version of me years ago.
And speaking of the park is where your relationship with writing, really, as a professional matter, began. You know, Lissa mentioned in my book, I talk about my life and my transition from being a lawyer, an unhappy lawyer, to being a journalist. And you became a writer through a similar process.
I was CEO of a technology company that was based in Florida, but I was living in New York, and so I'd fly down on a Monday and back on a Thursday night or a Friday morning. And I did love it. I actually think there are a lot of similarities between entrepreneurship and writing. You sort of come in each day as a small business owner, and you set the vision and write the next chapter of the company. You have a lot of control over direction of things, and there is an aspect of managing people that writing doesn't have, and that was something that I think I was pretty good at but didn't love. but I grew increasingly frustrated with running this company. This is a whole other story, but we had a very dysfunctional board of directors and investors, and there's a lot of infighting at that level. So half my job was managing this dysfunctional board. And there was a lot of travel, and we had just had our son. And so I was disgruntled, I guess. I mean, and we were walking in the park, strolling our son, and Meg was observing rightly that I was snapping and short-tempered and not that happy, and it was related to work. And so we talked about ways to change that. And at that time, I had already been writing this draft of what became the first novel, and not as a thing that I ever thought would be a career or anything I would pursue professionally. It was just really to relax on planes. I was writing instead of reading. But she had read it by this time, because it was a completed first draft that I was just sort of monkeying around with, and she thought it was pretty good. So the conversation strayed from, what other, leave the company and go to that company, or to maybe just leave this kind of career behind altogether and make the leap all the way to try this writing thing out. And so after thinking about it a bit more, I decided that was the thing to do. And this was trickier for us at the time, because at that time I was, I think, still earning more than you. There was a brief window where that was happening. And so it was a decision it was a family decision. So I went to the board of the company and said, I'm going to leave. I'll lead the company through a sale if you want me to do that, or I'll leave now, but I'll stay up to 12 months to kind of leave in a good way. And so they asked me to lead a sale of the company, which I did. And during that time, I got an agent. And after the sale of the company, having done lots of rewriting with my agent, who I'm still with, and they're terrific, and I love them and could never leave them, then got a deal for the first book.
And the rest, as they say, is history. I just want to ask, we're going to take questions from the audience. There we go. But I want to ask you to just tell one story about Nelson DeMille, who you guys are probably familiar with, who is actually a critical figure in Doug's writing career, both at the beginning and then really ever after.
We were on vacation, and I read The Gold Coast by Nelson DeMille, which I loved. I just enjoyed that book so much. And when we were leaving, Hemingway is also someone who makes you want to be a writer. As much of a disaster as he really was personally, he sort of romanticized the writing life. But I read this book by Nelson and loved it. And as we were flying out, I thought, man, I'd love to do that. And somehow that book just hit me more in that vein, and maybe it was just where I was at that time. But it inspired me to start writing. And so fast forward through all that last story I just told you. The first book was out, and some woman who was the librarian at the Union League Club in New York was on a train in from Bronxville to Manhattan, and someone was reading my book, then a couple seats over, and laughing. So she goes over and says, "What is that book?" And he says, "Oh, it's this book, Goes to Manhattan by Doug Brunt." And is it good? She says, "Yeah." So she puts it on the list for this book fair that Nelson DeMille hosts every December at the Union League Club. And so I went, of course. I thought it was great. And it was a really fun event. Nelson goes every year. And so we had a few drinks, because they have all the authors get together first. So I had a few drinks and went over to Nelson. I told him this story, that the last book I read before I wrote the first book was your book, The Gold Coast. And so we had a great night. We became friends. And he's become a mentor to me. We're still in touch on a regular basis. I see him about once a month, because we're in a book club together. And with a number of other people, like Amor's in it too. And so he's been a big star in this since like the 70s with his first book, Rivers of Babylon. And so he's a great sounding board for me. He's always great with advice, not only on the craft of writing, but on all the business and other aspects of it, with agents and publicists and book tours and things like that. So he's been a great friend.
Doug's done a good job in the writing community, which can be very isolating, right? Because I think, in my experience, a lot of writers are introverts. And so that's one of your frustrations, is you're sort of an introvert. You're sort of a weird combo. He is, because I'm fine being on TV in front of 25 million people. I don't get nervous. It's fine. I can do that. But standing up, this crowd is okay. But if I had to stand up in front of 1,000 people, my heart would be pounding. I'd be like, oh my God, they can see me. They can see me. He's fine. He can stand up in front of 5,000 people and just start talking. It's a weird combo. But lives a more introverted, general life. Anyway, Doug has taken the writing community by storm in New York, because he's created a community for them, and they have this great book club, and they meet at these book sort of conclaves in Manhattan, and it's a list of authors, all of whom you would know, and any one of whom you would love to have a dinner with. And they sit around our apartment and talk about their favorite books or about the book that they've read in their book club. And it's really just a privilege even to have one ear. I think I might be invited soon, because you have to have written a book to get in. Although I have not been officially invited. Okay, so let's talk about the audience's questions. I love this one. Do you think fiction is the best way to get to life's deeper truths? That's a good one.
I love that question. And there's a review, I'll read it to you. By believably conjuring a professional tennis prodigy who is, of all things, poetic, sensitive, and well-read, Douglas Brunt's trophy son takes us deeper inside the modern men's game than any non-fiction account could. And that was written by the guy who wrote McEnroe's biography. And so, yes, I do. I think fiction, like sort of the rules don't apply. You can explore anything you want to explore, and you can create circumstances that help express an idea in ways that are bound by reality in other ways. So I love fiction. I think the novel is one of the greatest formats of anything.
To that point, I'll top that. Book List said about Trophy Son, Brunt's reputation for conducting tireless research to create page-turning fiction is fully upheld here. And they go on from there. But I agree with that. Okay, so did the writing process for this book change how you parent?
I would say are ongoing. I mean, how we parent is pretty fluid, and we're always learning, and it's, to say the least.
Just like throwing stuff at the board. Oh, God.
It is a dynamic thing, and we're learning and trying to get better and making mistakes, but it's that process and this upcoming thing. We're not to date us yet again in one sitting, but we are a little old to have kids this age. Sorry to say, honey. I'm just going to put it out there. So many of our friends have kids who are coming out of this process, and so we've been able to watch this through our close friends' kids who are now maybe 16 or 17. And now our kids are coming up on this, and that's what got me thinking. But our parenting process and our effort to do well here is why a lot of this was on my mind and why I chose this as a topic to explore in fiction.
It's like you always think you're going to be so thoughtful about everything with respect to your children. And so far, 7 years into parenthood, it's more like, I'm so exhausted. I just have to do. I don't have any time to think. Just got to get them out of the house and get them to school on time and not screw them up too badly. So did you interview or talk with any current players? And how did that affect the story, if at all? To what extent did your own viewing or playing the game contribute?
The first part with players, I did. The names that you would know are James Blake and John Isner. Both were very generous with their time and added a lot. And as much as they did, I also talked to some players who had a similar background to those top pros. James peaked at number 4 in the world. They've both been the number 1 American at various times. James was number 4 in the world at one time. But I also talked to people who had the same early youth experience but never got that high. People who maybe were number 3 in Brazil and nothing in the world. And they had a great perspective on it too, because they arrived at that age not having made millions and facing that decision of what to do next. And they still generally orbit the sport in some way, either as a teaching pro at a tennis club or a coach or somehow involved with the sport. And I actually just did an interview with the Tennis Channel last week, and I was talking with Mark Knowles, who was a doubles specialist and one of the online people, and they were telling me that someone they knew had just done some research about what the economic break-even is in tennis. What do you have to be ranked in the world in general to just be breaking even? And it was about 55 or something like that, because you're really not making that much prize money. You're not tapping into that much endorsement money yet. And these people, even though they might make $1 million a year in prize money, because there are lots of satellite tournaments with some purses, but you're still paying all your travel. You got all your flights and your hotels. You're paying for a coach and a trainer. And there are a lot of expenses being a tour professional. And it's only, if you're in the top 5, Federer, of course, is one of the highest paid athletes in any sport. But once you get out of the top 10, it's like a cliff. And so anyway, someone close to the sport to this calculation. It came out to be about 55 in the world. Of course, that varies, and there's lots of variables in that, but it's tough. And so talking to these people was also fascinating, and their perspective on the sport and the commitment and the grind and was it worth it and that kind of thing. In my own experience, just competing, I am a hack player. There are these summer tournaments that I occasionally play. So, I've had some very low stress, tournaments at the beach, match play, but things where it's like match points. I try, I had a little bit that I could add in there, but there was a lot of research.
So the acronym for this club that we are at is LEHYC, L-E-H-Y-C, and Doug has come in second in the tournament a number of times. When we first got together, I was at his mother's house, and I see these plaques all around the house on the walls, and I said, "Who is LEHYC, and why does he keep coming in second?" Doug's like, "Look over there." Who's the tennis player you admire most, and why?
Oh, man. I always thought Rafter had a beautiful game. I loved watching his game. But Federer, I think Federer is such a classy ambassador for the sport. The most beautiful game to watch. I love that one-handed backhand is just gorgeous, and he just seems like I haven't met him, but he seems like a very classy guy. His public persona is spot on, and I just think he's great for the game.
What about the more colorful players that we know? Like everybody thinks of McEnroe, and is there anybody like that today who yells at everyone? And
there's this Greek guy, Kyrgios, who apparently is like a behavior problem in the way that people probably viewed McEnroe back in the day. And as a player, I didn't love McEnroe as much. It's only sort of in retrospect that he's become more loved because he's such a good commentator. I think almost everyone loves his color on the tennis matches. No, the behavior is better. They're like Connors and McEnroe were these bad boys of tennis. I don't feel like.
There was that one moment with Serena a couple of years ago.
Oh, when she went after
that was exciting.
linesman? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. The little lines coach was not happy. Okay, so youth athletes are pushed in all kinds of sports, but does something stand out specifically with tennis? I mean, do you think they're pushing kids more towards tennis, or that if you choose that, you gotta go all in earlier?
I think it's all in earlier. It's more isolating. The tennis academy infrastructure around early youth tennis is, there are maybe only a few things like it. Maybe figure skating or something like that is like it. But that shipping off to a tennis academy in Florida when you're 14, I think is unlike any of these other major sports. The other aspect of tennis is it is this individual sport, and even when you're in a match, you can't even talk to your coach. You can't really sort of talk to the other player. Almost every other sport has aspects where you're interacting either with your opponent or a coach or a teammate. With tennis, that's really not there. You're just sort of in this bubble. Even a boxer is sort of rubbing foreheads with somebody and talking trash and goes back to a corner.
Is that good or bad?
I think it's very isolating. It's tough. I mean, maybe some people, the introverts, would love it and are comfortable with that and just want to perform without having to engage people. But there's an aspect of isolation there that I think is hard for most people.
But the thing about tennis, unlike football, is it's a lifetime sport. So it's like you get your kids involved in that, they've got something that they can stay fit doing forever.
Unless they hate it by the time they're 18.
Yeah, there is that.
But that's true. I mean, lacrosse. I mean, we know friends whose kids just played in their final tournament of their senior year, and they've played lacrosse since they were 8 every weekend all season. And now at the end of that game, they put down the lacrosse stick, and they may never pick one up again in their life after committing 10 years of family time to this thing. So that's the nice thing about tennis. It's a lifelong sport.
So before we wrap it up, you have already written your next book. You're well on your way. You've actually written a few things since you closed out Trophy Son. Do you want to share anything with us about the next project?
The next one is the main character is a writer. I don't know, maybe many writers get around to this eventually, writing a book about writers. And the main character is more of a literary fiction writer, while his best friend is more of a commercial fiction writer. And there's all sorts of weirdness between literary and commercial. And it's a very blurred line increasingly too. But all the literary, all the commercial fiction writers would love more literary acclaim. You know, like Stephen King would love to be winning Pulitzers, and is frustrated that sometimes he's not taken as a more serious literary writer. But then, of course, the serious literary writers, they would love to sell 1/10 of the number of books that Stephen King does. When that guy comes out on a pub date, everyone tries to get out of the way. You know, Stephen King just moved on Harlan Coben's pub date, and Harlan's like, my streak of #1 is over. And if you look at the bestseller list, it's really hard to sell a lot of books if you're not more commercial. So there's lots of interesting dynamics between different kinds of writers within the writing community. So it explores some of that, and even the book kind of starts out more literary and moves to more commercial in the end.
That's right. That's the irony of the book, is that there's actually a sort of pulsating plot line that involves a real mystery. And this one's been sort of in the drawer for a while, and it's great. People are going to love it. Before I let you go, which of your books is your favorite? You got Ghost in Manhattan, you've got The Means, you've got Trophy Son now.
Maybe it's a weird thing with writers. I always feel like the last one. And if someone said, I love Ghost of Manhattan too, but if someone said that, I'd be like, really? I haven't gotten any better since my first book? This is depressing. So I genuinely feel this is the best. So who knows, maybe that's a weird blind spot writers have, but I think this one is the best.
I agree with you, and it's beautifully done, honey. Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you both. And I hope you will come back for the next book. And I hope you'll come back for his book and your next
Done.
book, whatever that's going to be.
He can interview me.
I'll be
Yeah,
here.
we-
Yeah.
No, I'm only kidding. I'm never writing another book.
Oh, yes,
Ever.
you are. She is. She just doesn't know it. But thank you both so much. You guys got to get the book. It's really great. And I'm telling you, it's perfect Father's Day gift. But not just for fathers. I loved it. I'm not a father. So there you go. But please come and have them sign. They'll be right up here doing that. Thank you all so much for coming. And we will see you soon. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you all.